Chapter 4 Marry Me. Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh, how well you look in my temple of love! Gilgamesh spun round. Through the perfumed smoke of the temple came a woman astounding in every way, swaying her hips, lifting her hair from the nape of her neck with both wrists. That hair! It spilled down like wine over brimming a beaker, from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet. It was Ishtar, goddess of love. Enkidu's heart sank, for he could see that Ishtar was in love. She would twine her slender brown arms around Gilgamesh, and Enkidu's newfound friend would be lost to him. For who could resist the goddess of love? He crept away into the daylight. "Gilgamesh," said Ishtar, "killing Huwawa was a feat worthy of a god. My heart was in my mouth as you fought. Now it is in my hands. Think, Gilgamesh, if I were to give you that heart to you, think. I would make you a chariot of lapis with golden wheels. King and princes would lie like carpet under your feet. I could give you storm demons to pull your wagons. Nothing less will do for a husband of mine." She brought her face close up against his. Her breath smelt of nutmeg and roses. "I love you, King of Uruk. Marry me." Gilgamesh breathed her in. The perfume made him dizzy. Then, resting his hand on her upper arms, he said, "I'll pay you all the prayers and sacrifices a devout man ought to pay to a goddess. I always have and I always will. But as for marrying you, oh." He sucked the air in through his teeth. "Not for all the honey in the hive, lady." And he stood her away from him as if he were sliding a chair back under a table. Ishtar's jaw dropped. A tendril of hair found its way into her mouth, and she spat it out again, blinking, astounded. "I'm flattered you should woo me," Gilgamesh went on, "but frankly I'd rather play dice with a handful of scorpions. I've heard about the men that you've loved in the past, and I've heard what became of them once you lost interest. Being loved by you is rather like being struck by masonry falling off a high building, isn't it?" Walking round and round her, he counted off on his fingers all the young men who had ever caught the eye of Ishtar. "Remind me, what became of your husband, Tammuz? Such a devoted lover. When your sister was holding you prisoner in the underworld, who took your place? Tammuz, the only person fool enough to spend eternity in the dark so that his true love could live in the sunlight. Take the shepherd, remember? The one who brought you mealy cakes and roasted his fluffy little kids for your supper, played flute tunes to you on a bone whistle. He thought he was the happiest man alive, till you tired of him and turned him into a wolf. Where is he these days? Still carrying his tail between his legs? Still howling at the moon? And didn't you love the king of the lions once? The one who died in those traps you dug for him, and that horse that took your fancy. Spurs and whip, that was his reward in the end. You rode him 7 leagues with spurs and a whip, then let him slake in thirst in muddy water. Take that bird who sang for you, the one with the multicolored plumes. When you tired of him, you smashed him like a ball with a racket, and now he sits on a branch and weeps. My wing, my wing, my poor broken wing." Ishtar opened and shut her mouth, but no words came out. "Oh, and that gardener, who tended your father's date palms? Does he enjoy being a mole, would you think? The trouble with you, madame, is that you start by kissing and end by cursing. I know you, lady, and I'd sooner wear tight shoes for the rest of my life than be married to you." And with a laugh which set all the candle flames quivering, Gilgamesh dodged her clawing fingernails, skipped out into the clean, white sunlight, and ran to find Enkidu. Ishtar gave a gasping roar. "Oh!" She beat her fists against the walls. "Oh!" She stamped and flung herself about in an ecstasy of rage. "Oh!" She ran all the way to heaven and threw herself down at her father's feet, weeping bitterly. "It's Gilgamesh," she sobbed. "Destroy him! Let me destroy him! He has insulted me. Anu fingered his beard. How? What did he say? He listed all my lovers and what I had done to them. Anu said, And? Did he slander you? Was it untrue? He called me Anu leaned forwards expectantly. Yes? What did he call you? Falling masonry! A pair of tight shoes! Why are you laughing? Never mind what he called me, the wretch! The vile, beastly, wicked, blaspheming nobody! He must be destroyed! Give me the bull of heaven to destroy Gilgamesh and his famous city of streets! He slaughtered Huwawa, and now he has slighted me. Anu's amusement turned to dismay at the news of Huwawa's death. Here was a serious affront to mighty Enlil, who had created the guardian of the cedar forest. Gilgamesh should not have pitted himself against the gods in such a way. Then loose the bull of heaven and destroy him, cried Ishtar. Do you know what you are asking, Ishtar? If I lose the bull of heaven, it will be 7 years before Uruk recovers. Famine and drought, destruction. Have you thought of the innocent people who may die? Ishtar wagged a dismissive hand. Yes, yes. The granaries are full. The people won't suffer, but Gilgamesh must. I demand that Gilgamesh pay for what he said. Well? Her tears splashed like hot lead on the pavements of heaven. Anu looked at his daughter. Anger made her ugly, as it makes all faces ugly. Her man's beard came bristling through the skin of her jaw. Her teeth were bared, her eyes bloodshot with shouting. It was plain there would be no peace until Ishtar got her way. Not the bull of heaven, daughter. Choose some lesser punishment. If you don't give me what I want, hissed Ishtar. Her voice was so menacing that even Anu shivered. I shall go now and smash the bolts on the gates of the underworld. I shall loose all the souls of the dead. Ishtar! Up they will come shrieking and gibbering out of the ground, jostling shoulders with the living. No one will quite know whether the man beside him is a ghost or if the bride behind the veil has been dead since the flood. Wait until the dead become hungry and begin to eat. Anu shuddered in disgust. Stop! Ishtar! The dead loose from the underworld to eat the living? Ishtar, enough! Well, I shall loose the bull of heaven, daughter, but it grieves me that a man should be punished simply for speaking the truth. In the city of Uruk, red dust trickled from the sandstone buildings, and all the dogs began to bark. Cockerels crowed in the middle of the night, and dates fell from the palm trees in fat black splats. The city of streets was feeling the approach of the bull of heaven. Then everyone in Uruk was awake and running, yelling and pointing out over the plain. The goddess Ishtar was coming out of the dawn, leading the bull of heaven, and no one had seen such a sight in the history of the world. From the parapets of the city wall, Gilgamesh and Enkidu watched. The bull was as big as a herd of elephants within one hide. Its great dew-lapped throat swept the ground and its horns spread like twin water spouts, catching the light. Plated in lapis lazuli, their shining blue bow was as huge as the prow and stern of a ship. Ishtar led it to the far bank of the river. How women do hate to be spurned, said Enkidu softly. He could smell the sweat in his friend's palms, smell his own fear, come to that. Here was destruction made flesh. Then it stamped, and there was no more thinking. The bull stamped and the earth simply opened up. Acres of ground subsided into a bottomless crevice, and with it 100 young men. Again the bull pawed the ground, head down, the ugly hump of its back quaking. Within the city the granaries fractured like stone eggs, spilling grain. Carved friezes crazed and fell in shards. Towers swayed and crumbled into dust, and a twin-forked, jagged chasm yawned in the ground, swallowing up 200 warriors of Uruk. The river Euphrates cascaded down into darkness. A single scream of terror hung in the air. It had the color of red dust and settled on Gilgamesh like blood. At the third stamp, the very walls of Uruk wavered like sheets of water. Enkidu was jarred off his feet and struck his head against the parapet. Pain paralyzed him. It seemed to sink through his skull and unstring his spine. Then he was on his feet again. Quick, before it can charge the city gate! Launching himself off the high wall, Enkidu landed between the very horns of the bull, grasping them like the shafts of a cart. The foam from its nostrils burst into his face, blinding him. Gilgamesh leaped down as well, sword drawn. "Well, friend, did we say we would make a name for ourselves?" called Enkidu. "Strike behind the horns if you can." Bucking stiff-legged, turning and turning on the spot, the bull of heaven lashed Enkidu with its thick, hairy cable of a tail and sent him sprawling along its back. But Gilgamesh was there to vault over the nose and take hold of the horns in Enkidu's place, to wrench them round until the beast was brought to a standstill. Enkidu meanwhile slithered over the bull's rump, grabbing the tail as he went, pulling it like a bow rope, hanging on even when the dust from under its iron hooves enveloped him in gritty darkness. Digging in with his heels, he hauled on the tail, quick, wrenching tugs which took its attention away from the flimsy gate, away from Gilgamesh straddling its neck. There was a flash of light, a hiss and a thud, and the blade of Gilgamesh's sword drove home right up to its hilt in the arch of the bull's neck, just between the nape and the horns. For long seconds the bull held still, the foam dripping from its nostrils into a sudsy pool between its feet. Then it staggered sideways, crashed against the walls of Uruk, lurched the other way. It stumbled as far as the river before falling into what little water was left, turning it blood red. Enkidu sat on the ground, holding his head, and Haiti, the dancing girl, ran towards him, asking was he hurt? Could she help? Up on the wall, a wall crazed now with jagged cracks, Ishtar, the goddess of love, let out a howl of pure hatred. Tears burst through her tightly shut lids, making runnels in the red dust which had painted her the color of rage. "See how they have butchered the lovely bull of heaven? Weep, women, at what they have done." And the women did begin weeping, not for the carcass lying in the river's mud, perhaps, but for the 300 young men swallowed up by the earth, for the empty river, for the spoiled beauty of the city. Enkidu was disgusted. He twisted off the bull's back leg and shied it at Ishtar, as he might a cat yelling on a wall. "If I could get my hands on you, I'd show you butchery." Gilgamesh stood on the body of the great bull. "See the horns, plated in lapis? I shall fill them with oil and offer the oil to my guardian gods. Then I shall hang them on the wall of my palace to remind me how I slew the bull of heaven." And the men, happy to be alive, cheered and carried Gilgamesh and Enkidu shoulder high into the battered city. Through streets strewn with rubble, past broken pillars and burning buildings, they carried Gilgamesh. He felt his everlasting fame assured. "Who fought the bull of heaven?" he shouted, and the clamoring little boy shouted back, "Gilgamesh! Gilgamesh! Who killed the bull of heaven?" he called out to a group of dancing girls watching the mob tumble by. The girls eyed one another uncertainly, lids still red with weeping. Then Haiti, the friend of Enkidu, stepped out of the shade into the sunlight. "Gilgamesh and Enkidu," she called, in her high singing voice. After the girls too were running alongside, whooping and chanting, "Gilgamesh, Enkidu, Gilgamesh, Enkidu." Only the mothers and old women stood in their doorways, shawls drawn tight under their shins, silent. And high on her tower, Ishtar, alone and disregarded, chewed on her plait of hair and cursed Gilgamesh under her breath. Death to Gilgamesh and Enkidu. A curse on their friendship and on their happiness. Justice on their mortal heads. Enkidu's head ached where he had slammed against the wall. Throughout the celebrations, he felt a little sick. That night he slept a sleep of utter exhaustion, and to the beating of the drums in his head, he dreamed a dream. The gods were gathered in conference. Anu, the father of gods, was there. So too was Enlil, god of heroes, Ea, the maker of mankind, Nergal of the underworld, Ninurta, god of war. A small patch of brightness which pinned Enkidu too much to look at, he took to be Shamash the sun. The gods stood shoulder to shoulder in a ring, their heads close together. "My daughter is right," Anu was saying. "Someone must pay." "And yet they fought well." "No warrior ever fought better," said Ninurta. "I would take two, but I will settle for one," said Nergal. Shut out by the circle of backs, Enkidu found it hard to hear. Apparently some crime had been committed. Shamash was speaking now. It was Gilgamesh who killed Huwawa. But it was Enkidu who cut down the tallest tree. As in all the worst dreams, Enkidu tried to speak, tried to put his side of the argument. But his hands would not lift and there was no breath in his lungs. His shouts only emerged in whimpers. Shamash was saying, "Were they not, in a way, honoring us by these heroic deeds?" Enlil rounded on Shamash. "The bull of heaven has been killed. Law demands the death penalty. It is simply a matter of deciding who shall die. Gilgamesh or Enkidu? Gilgamesh or Enkidu? Gilgamesh or Enkidu? Gilgamesh or—" He woke with the name of his friend on his lips. Gilgamesh or. He was wet with sweat and shivering. He had to go and tell Gilgamesh to warn him. Dreams were not just the rotting vegetation of the past, the leaves blown down from the day before. Dreams were omens. Dreams were messages. He slipped his legs off the bed and tried to stand up. But the roaring inside his head was like the bull of heaven bellowing. He covered his eyes, but the light still seared through to his brain. Sweat crawled down his body like a swarm of beetles, and his guts ached. "Gilgamesh!" he tried to call, but his own name emerged instead. "Enkidu! Enkidu must die!"